Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle that has been meeting every week since April of this year, I believe. And 2 weeks ago, what we did for our gem was to watch the presentation of the Ramayana during the Diwali Festival of Lights. Last week, we heard about the guardian wall. And this week's topic is culminating a set of topics that we have been listening to on the Eightfold Path from the Buddhist tradition. And so the last of the steps on this Eightfold Path, even though they don't necessarily have to be followed sequentially, but the last of the 8 that are listed is called, in English, often right meditation. To present this topic for us, we have the same person who gave us really illustrious vision of the Buddha's life when several months ago he told us the story of the Buddha's life leading into how it was that he wanted to end suffering for the world. And that presenter is Kirk Gradin, and I'm so pleased to have him with us again today to speak to us about a topic that he has given great consideration to, and that is right meditation. Kirk?
Thank you, Renee, and to the center for inviting me to speak again, going at great risk to do so. Because I'm going to try and cover quite a bit of ground in a short period, and because I'll be using terms that many people may not be familiar with, I'm going to, I've produced a PowerPoint that goes along with the talk, so I'm going to share that now. And it's about 20 slides. It should take about 20 minutes or so to go through them. And I'd like to start with a short benediction that is foundational to all Northern schools of Buddhism. Since we cannot separate the individual from the whole, as great teachers have told us, and since our aim is service and learning, we offer whatever good or merit that may arise from this meeting and our discussion together for the good of all sentient beings. And this benediction reflects the first step of what is called the Bodhisattva Path in Northern Buddhism, the arising of bodhicitta, the altruistic wish to gain enlightenment or wisdom for the sake of relieving the suffering of other human beings. And it is said that without this fundamental motivation, also called right resolve in the Buddhist Eightfold Path, that the realization of wisdom cannot properly unfold. And connecting up with last week, one of the meanings of the activity of what is called the guardian wall is the tremendous benefit to humanity by great teachers who have appeared and left us their teachings. And these treasures, as we've discovered, are the gems of various wisdom traditions, which we are attempting to learn about in these weekly meetings. And that it could be said that the extent to which we make use of them, to that extent we are participating in the protection and guidance that the guardian wall offers humanity. And for those who may not be familiar with the term, Theosophia is from the Greek, Theos meaning God and Sophia meaning wisdom. And in the Theosophical tradition, it is in fact emphasized that if you were, for example, able to gather all these great teachers of which we have mentioned, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Mahavira, Socrates, Pythagoras, and many others, that you would actually find them in complete agreement. Each is valued for the unique perspective they offer to the world, but all have a common source. And like the differentiation of white light as it passes through a prism, if properly understood, all would be seen as having the same fundamental truths at their core. However, because much of what we know about these teachings is only partial, the deeper side, which is referred to as the esoteric side, was kept for those who had properly prepared themselves. And this is why Jesus, for example, taught in parables. What Theosophy attempts to do is point to that white light, to those underlying truths which are common to all and which are said to reside in every human heart. So we'll begin with this striking quote, which occurs on November 20th, actually, in the Still and Moving Center Almanac from the Dalai Lama. If every 8-year-old is taught meditation, we will eliminate violence from the world in 1 generation. This is a remarkable statement and stunning. How could that be? Why would the Dalai Lama say such a thing? Is this an exaggeration of the truth? So this is part of what we're going to try and understand today. In the Buddhist tradition, human life is often said to be off-center and is plagued by what are called the 3 poisons: hatred, attachment, and ignorance, symbolized by the snake, the bird, and a pig, as you see in this diagram here. These 3 afflictions are ultimately those which tie human beings to suffering, to a perpetual wheel of birth and death, what is called samsara. But this is not the inevitable or natural state of things, and nature always provides the antidote. So in Buddhism, the 3 antidotes are also called the 3 perfections, that of Shila, or ethics, Samadhi, meditation, and Prajna, meaning wisdom. And these 3 are also a traditional way of summarizing the Eightfold Path. So right speech, right action, and right livelihood are part of the foundation of ethics. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation are all part of the discipline of meditation, or samadhi, while right view and right intention are subsumed under the discipline of prajna, or wisdom. And this traditional way of condensing the Eightfold Path into the 3 perfections is helpful for several reasons. 1, it allows us to see more clearly the interdependence of the steps and stages of practice. For example, without ethics, the proper training of the mind is impossible. And this you find in many great contemplative traditions. That is, that moral states precede mental states. But mental states, or higher states of consciousness, which are developed through meditation, also help to refine and elevate our ethical awareness. That is, through training the mind, which is also a progressive purification of the heart, or blending of the heart and the mind, especially in the Bodhisattva tradition, that through that process, a form of higher ethical practice unfolds, a deeper ethics, more profound ethics. And as meditation and higher ethics deepen, truths which we may have only previously understood at an intellectual or philosophical level start to become living realities. And this is the great promise of the Bodhisattva Path, that through it, what we call intuition becomes definitive. Truths are no longer something that we read about in great books or are a mere belief or a feeling, but a form of direct seeing and direct knowing, which is called in the Buddhist tradition direct cognition. So it's a merging of the mind and heart in those fundamental spiritual realities that are at the basis of nature. And that is, again, the great promise that the 3 perfections as interdependent aspects of this spiraling path to enlightenment. One more, or a few more basic definitions. So in the Buddhist tradition, and which you also find in Patanjali, which is a treatise in the Hindu tradition on meditation, you find 3 basic stages. The first being that of dharana, the second dhyana, and the third, samadhi. Now, these are, of course, Sanskrit words which have broad and deep meanings to them, but we can define them for beginning purposes in this way. Dharana as the focusing of the mind on some one interior object with a complete abstraction from the world of the senses or the external universe. And as dharana develops and progresses, we begin to enter what's called the Bodhi portal, that of dhyana, which is actually in a very advanced state of meditative stabilization and unbroken continuity of consciousness. And in Southern Buddhism, they speak of fourfold dhyana, but in Northern Buddhism, and that of the Bodhisattva Path, it's eightfold. The higher four referring to this magnificent creative unfolding of the universal activities that become possible for the Bodhisattva. And then finally, a samadhi, which transcends the capacity of language to fully define it. But for tentative purposes, we can call it the complete absorption in the one. That is, pure direct knowledge of the non-dual nature of things. And in the Prajna Paramita, it states that in this state, this condition of samadhi, all dualities are overcome. And there's no longer the sense of samsara as opposed to nirvana. There's no sense of self and other. There is no other. There is only the one, self. But most of us, of course, are at the very initial stages of trying to learn how to meditate. And this is where dharana becomes our focus. And it could be said that whether we are aware of it or not, and whether we have formally practiced meditation or not, that we have all had many moments of dharana in our life. Think of those occasions when, out of love or concern for someone, or to accomplish, learn, or practice a particular skill or undertaking, that we have become so one-pointed, so focused on the task or the thought or the concern at hand, that all other sensory input fades away. We forget ourselves and become one-pointedly absorbed in the engagement, whatever that happens to be. Time passes without notice. All the energies are engaged, and at least for a period, all other cares and concerns, which normally distract the mind, dissolve into the background. Well, in the Theosophical tradition of the Bodhisattva Path, the beginning stages of dharana are an attempt to bring this focusing and then the calm settling of the mind and singularity of focus to higher ideas or ideals through what are called bija sutras, that is, seed ideas. And these are generally axioms or aphoristic sayings that can be found in many scriptures, different scriptures. And I mentioned one of my favorites last week, which we talked about a little bit, from Nicholas of Cusa. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. Theosophically, what Cusa called God would ultimately be identical with what is called the Buddha nature, the highest form of universal intelligence and omniscience, as well as transcendence, the synthesis of both wisdom and compassion in the cosmos, in nature and humanity. It is in every human heart and every point of space. It would be the same as what is referred to as Brahman or Parabrahm in the Hindu tradition, what is called Ein Sof in the mystical Jewish tradition. These are all different for expressing the same idea, which ultimately cannot be expressed in human language because it refers to reality that is boundless and infinite. And as soon as you name it, you limit it. But also, as many traditions point out, the initial stages of meditation on a Bija Sutra, such as this, will involve both discursive and non-discursive thought. And this is another critical distinction that is often overlooked in many New Age practices of meditation that emphasize simply stilling or quieting the mind without also engaging various levels and states of consciousness that should accompany and help that which is gained in meditation to blossom and flower. The non-discursive states of dharana would involve what we call resting the mind in its natural state within the pure magnificence of the idea itself, where the individual light of the mind enters into the ocean of light. To simply dwell upon the boundless ocean of God or the Buddha nature, of perfected wisdom and universal empathy and compassion, in which everything is said to exist and live and move and have its being, this oceanic peace, goodness, sweetness, and love, is, of course, a tremendous cleansing power and healing, has a healing value for the mind. But the infinite that we might be able to touch with the mind and heart in such states can also be used consciously to transform all levels of thinking, as we were saying, all our daily involvements, all relationships and duties. It can be used to wash and cleanse the brain mind on all its various levels, and thereby activate what's called the spiritual will as being expressed through specific words and actions. And again, this means engaging in a meditative state, those lower, what we would think of as lower discursive levels of thought or critical thinking, utilizing what's called both the inductive and the deductive method of thought. Meditation then becomes both about the takeoff and the landing. It's not just a flight into the infinite heavens, but also a gentle return to earth. So the deductive method, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is that which proceeds from universals to particulars. So the Bija Sutra gives the universal perspective. For example, if I assume that in fact it is true that God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere, one can raise the question, how should that affect the way I view various aspects of nature, the way I think of other human beings, the way I think about the purposes and aims of human life? Each of these questions can in itself be a meditation and something that we can return to again and again. And we need to, in fact, attempting to penetrate deeper, to see it from multiple perspectives, to entertain a diversity of perspectives in order to give it the richness and fullness that it deserves. At a more individual level, you could raise questions like, how does this Bija Sutra, or how could it be used to transform the way I treat a problem child, the way I address my coworkers, the way I use my voice, resolve problems with my partner, the way I do the dishes, and so on. And if we're honest with ourselves and we give ourselves time to reflect deeply upon these questions, to engage them in a meditative state, we find that more questions arise than answers, actually. And so the search deepens. We become more finely attuned to our own impediments, our own, those three poisons that we talked about, to our own ignorance, our blindness. And we begin to see how the mind dwells mostly in regions of half-truth, partial truth, or untruth. And if we're not content to settle these questions with simple, conventional, or dogmatic answers, we find that more study is needed, and that more additional sutras, additional Bija Sutras may need to be looked at and engaged to more fully answer or probe into the questions. And eventually in this process, we begin to see that there's actually a whole constellation of seed ideas, not just one, but many are needed in order to begin approaching the fundamental secrets of spiritual life. And also through this process, the soul begins to hunger for a more direct way of knowing that we talked about earlier, a more direct engagement with the truth of things that, again, cannot ultimately be expressed adequately in language. And this is where right meditation really means a lifelong search. It embraces all the spokes of the Eightfold Path, and is an all-embracing quest for understanding that is indispensable in the process of self-transformation in the service of others. And so we're just going to end with one of my favorite quotes about meditation. And this is from a great teacher from over 150 years ago. His name was William Quan Judge. Will and desire lie at the door of meditation and concentration. If we desire truth with the same intensity that we have formerly wished for success, money, vacation, we will speedily acquire meditation and possess concentration. If we do all our acts, small and great, every moment, for the sake of the whole human race as representing self, then every cell and fiber of the body and inner man will be turned in one direction, resulting in perfect concentration. This is expressed in the New Testament in the statement that if the eye is single, the whole body will be full of light. Let us meditate on that which is in us as the highest self, concentrate upon it, and will to work for it as dwelling in every human heart.
I would like to say that is one of the most comprehensive and beautiful explanations of meditation that I have ever heard, Kirk. I am really blown away by how, and Judge's quote at the end just touched me very deeply. I thank you. It was just beautiful. Thank you.
I appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
Well, I would have to echo that, and also mention that the reason that that final quote is so appropriate to end a very lofty talk like that one with is that it gives us so much hope that all of us can attain to this with just steady effort, a little bit at a time, that this is accessible and possible to us all.
Well, one of the things I hoped to kind of bring in the talk was this idea that Judge talks about elsewhere, about there being two kinds of meditation, really. One being that which we engage in at a set time each day, where we attempt to focus the mind. But the other is what he calls the line of life's meditation, and which he says that everyone is engaged in, whether they know it or not. And that both have this problem that as soon as you begin to try and live a focused life, a dedicated life, as soon as you begin to try and focus the mind in meditation, that all kinds of things crop up. All kinds of things that rally against that arise. And so in both cases, all the virtues, for example, that we find described in the Bodhisattva Path are needed. That those are not just things that we do to, improve our ethical character and the tenor of our lives, but are actually needed in order to be able, for the mind to be able to stay in that continuity which we're attempting to cultivate. And so yes, that any any act, he says that, begin by giving your full attention to whatever it is you're doing. Give your full attention to it. Complete fully every known duty. He says that's the beginning of yoga. Robert?
It was interesting when you showed the stupa and you put alongside it the prajna, shila, and samadhi. But it was interesting that at the top you had right view and right intention, which are the first two of the Eightfold Noble Path.
Right.
So I'm just kind of curious that was the pinnacle.
Right.
Right view and right intention.
Yes.
I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
Thank you for asking that question, because I love this explanation, which I've read. It's not me. It's not my own understanding, but Shankara Shita, who's written many books on Buddhism, talks about this. So let's take a right view, first of all. So we would want to affirm, as Buddhism does, that you really can't begin the path, the spiritual path, unless you have some idea what that is, and you have some preliminary sense of discrimination between what is going to take you away from that path and what's going to settle you on the path. And that requires a kind of a basic understanding about principles of human nature, the principles, the nature of the monkey mind, the nature of ethics. How does one discriminate between what is right and wrong? And what does it mean to settle the mind? And how does one cultivate conscious awareness of when the mind is going off astray and when it's on the right track? So all of these things, plus much more, really, so this beginning understanding, which you would say is you need that right view even to begin the path. But as we talked about, as your understanding of the philosophical perspective deepens about what the nature of the path is and how you go about practicing it. And your ethical, you start to solidify that ethical foundation, which you see as being the basis in which the rest of the superstructure can be built. And you start to engage in meditation. That view, instead of being something that you've read about in a book or have thought through on your own in a discursive way, starts to takes on a greater and deeper reality. And ultimately, that right view is that we were talking about, that direct engagement with underlying spiritual realities. And so it's both at the beginning and it comes at a much higher level at the end. And you could say the same thing about right intention as well.
Could you say a little bit more? Intention is a right view sort of insight, and right intention is a discrimination that mobilizes your will in a certain direction. Could you say a little bit more about right view in relation to right intention? Thank you.
Another very good question. Thank you. And I'm not a scholar of Buddhism, so you have to take all of this with a grain of salt. But I have read a bit, and this is also one of the really magnificent themes that's developed in Shantideva's book on the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, which there's a number of translations of it, and I'd recommend it to anyone who's interested. But Shantideva, who was a very revered, a true scholar and kind of master of the tradition in Buddhism, he talks about bodhicitta, which I introduced at the beginning. And this is what I would connect with right intention and right resolve, both actually, but primarily with right intention. And that again, that without that as one's motivation, that the path becomes something other than a path of wisdom. It becomes a, which traps that we all fall into. It becomes something about self-aggrandizement. It can become an ego trip. It can become, a quest for personal stature, whatever. But then there's many traps and ways to fall off that fundamental motivation. But that is really the essence of the beginning step, that it needs to be altruistic motivation. And that is called, and at the beginning, bodhicitta, it's called relative bodhicitta. Well, why is that? Because we have this concept that I am separate from you, and my motivation is to help you or to help others out there be relieved from the suffering that I see going on in the world. So there's this sense of separation between self and other. But as one gains right view, as one, not just philosophically, but as we say, that ultimately it's the wisdom that is developed is this non-dual wisdom. So it's no longer self and other. There is no self and other. And so bodhicitta, which is called, when it reaches its culmination, is called ultimate bodhicitta, or what we would call absolute compassion, because it's no longer me helping the other guy. I am not separate from the other guy. I am not separate from any aspect in nature, any being in nature, any form of sentient life, any life at all. And so that ceaseless effort that the Bodhisattva is making is really no effort. This is what the Prajnaparamita says. It's really no effort because one is that. One is that natural, compassionate energy of the universe that is bringing about and aiding and nurturing the enlightenment of all beings. It's a fundamental reality in nature that one has just joined oneself with. So it's the drop has returned to that ocean.
Kirk, I heard one Buddhist teacher say that monks may have trouble practicing the virtues initially, but after they have learned meditation on compassion, they find it much easier. So you think that's why? Because they're beginning to diminish the separation between self and other?
Well, that's another excellent question, and there's a lot that could be said about that. But yes, I would say that's probably true. But also, one of the things that's said is that in this process of the knowledge, which is self-knowledge, which is an understanding of the truths of nature, that one, and in this, this realization of one being inseparable from nature happens in stages. And Bhavani Shankar, who's another magnificent teacher of the Hindu tradition, and also was involved in the Theosophical movement in the 1800s, he talks about 7 stages of initiation, in fact, and that at each of those stages, what one is discovering at a deeper level, that one is what one thought of as being, my body, for example, my mind, my desire nature, that actually it belongs to nature. It is an inseparable part of macrocosmic, the larger nature. And so it's this progressive understanding of how the microcosm, or rather how the macrocosm is working continually through the microcosm. the universal through the individual. And in that process, those larger energies associated with the whole of nature that are sustaining and nourishing nature begin to enter into the individual in a purer sense. Instead of being diverted for some self-purpose, they naturally flow through and becomes a means of gifting, of regenerating others, of healing others, in fact. But this is also one of the reasons why, as far as I understand it, why it's a secret path. That is that there's a danger in that, right? If we have not properly purified the motivation and have, you could say, quieted or paralyzed all those tendencies in ourself that is in it for self-benefit, that those spiritual energies, deeper energies, will reverse and they become a means of self-destruction, you know? And so that is why one wants to tread one step at a time. You know, that's one of the famous sayings of Gandhi, you know, I don't want to hear about, you know, the 10th step. Just show me enough light so that I can properly take the next step that's in front of me.
This is a really simple sounding question, I think. Can you talk about an approach of simply stilling the mind, trying to have no thoughts? And I believe you may have referred to this when you were talking about New Age approaches to meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And between that and focusing the mind on a seed thought and cultivating that, can you distinguish between those two for me, please?
Yes. So this is a whole nother aspect that we left out, but just because of time constraints. But in the Buddhist tradition, what you find if you go to a beginning course or a Sangha, classes on meditation, you will find that they talk about two aspects of meditation. One is called shamatha and the other is vipassana. And shamatha is the settling of the mind, the calming, stilling of the mind. And one of the definitions we've heard that I really like is this settling of the mind in its natural state, because that is the proper and natural condition of the mind is calm and settled and focused. The other, vipassana, has to do with this intensity of focus, of unitary concentration on one thing. And it also tends, especially at the beginning stages, vipassana can create a kind of tension both in the mind and in your posture. You'll find that various parts of your body start to tighten up, and you're trying to grasp or hold on to the idea. And so it's very essential that, and typically you'll find this at the beginning, is this shamatha. And one of the techniques to begin developing shamatha is focus on the breath. And often the instruction is to attend to the sensation of the breath as it passes through the lower part of the nostrils. And all you're trying to do is listen to the breath. And that's difficult. But then there's another stage in which this listening, you have to learn how to not affect the breath. In other words, can you so settle this focus and your calmness that you are not interfering in any way with that natural rhythm of the breath? And that is, if you can develop that, even for a short period of time, 7-10 minutes, that creates a tremendous sense of calm, but also of energy. It's because you realize that nature of its own accord has this rhythm, this natural rhythm and energy to it, that one doesn't have to push, one doesn't have to strain, that nature will work that way. And the mind is like that as well. But what this idea of a bija entering, you can enter or engage a bija sutra in relation to the breath, which I found to be also tremendously helpful in not just gaining this calmness, but elevating it as well, elevating consciousness. So we all know that all parts of nature have this rhythm to them, this kind of heartbeat, that everything we look at is traveling, is moving in cycles. And in the Hindu tradition, the universe itself is coming and going. There's a day and a night of Brahma. And so the coming and going of the universe is called the great breath. And in a sense, the individual breath is a reflection, it's a microcosmic reflection of the great breath. And if you start to dwell on that, while also trying to keep that non-interference with the breath, the mind elevates, because you also become aware of that which is attentive to the breath. I didn't mention that. But as you develop this capacity for watching the breath, you start to notice that there is that mind which is noticing the breath. That's not the breath, that's not your thoughts, but is aware of them. And that corresponds with, in the macrocosm, what is referred to as, the watcher, that form of consciousness which transcends the coming and going of universes. So that which we think of as being the individual self, that I which can watch the breath, becomes linked with what we might call God. It becomes linked with, or that Buddha nature, which utterly transcends, and yet pervades all of life. And so again, you get this, if you dwell in that frame, you can combine that idea of a bija sutra with the calming of the mind. That's just an example, one example. There many could be given.
So the settling of the mind, in other words, is more of the beginning stage, and then one begins to focus the mind from there, and that's a further development of meditation. Yes,
and in fact, it's you find that in traditional forms of meditative instruction that you go from one to the other, because as the mind begins to focus and center more and more intently, it needs the balancing of that shamatha state. And so all practices, formal practices where you're setting aside a time to practice, begins with shamatha, and then you go into these deeper levels of vipassana, and ultimately the two become one, right? They become like wings that are flapping together, and there isn't an oscillation anymore, but they become a singularity of calmness and continuity. So I've heard.
And when you mention the two wings, I'm thinking of that beautiful image of the bird that you showed. And when you were talking about taking off into meditation and then landing at the end. And so we were tying, I believe, meditation into our everyday lives.
Yes. Yeah. So, this is, again, I think, something that isn't often emphasized in many instructional manuals and so on regarding meditation. But it is very much something that was taught within the Theosophical tradition of the last 2 centuries. And that is the importance of engaging self-consciously engaging what's called the discursive mind, that is the mind that is trying to reason from universals to particulars, as part of the meditative process of this redescent, of coming back in for the landing. And it engages what's also referred to as self-study. That is to look at what we call the particulars. In each case, the particulars are our everyday life. How can those be refined? How can they be elevated? How can we bring some of the flavor of what we've engaged with in meditation to those involvements, to that dharma? And obviously, the answer is not going to be one. It's not going to be one answer, and it's not going to be the whole answer. What may come to one in a particular attempt at meditation as one descends may be a tentative answer. Well, at least today I can try this, and maybe this will introduce a new element, a higher element in that relationship. Maybe I don't need to react like I have in the past, because one also, through the practice of meditation, one naturally becomes much more aware of when the mind is going astray. That is, you cannot meditate unless you develop that capacity for self-awareness at deeper and deeper levels of the mind. And you start to see, as soon as it's going off and it's starting to get entangled in that anger mode, or that self-interest mode, or that anxiety mode, you catch it and you're able to set it back. But even more specifically, as we all have probably had this experience, that ideas will come to you. There's tremendous creativity and energy that's developed through meditation that can radically change the way we engage with the world in very specific and definitive ways. That's kind of what each person has to discover, but that descent, that landing is very much considered a crucial aspect of how to build that bridge between heaven and earth, right? That's that Antaskarana bridge that Professor Elton Hall was talking about some months back when he presented. How to bring together heaven and earth.
Could I ask Diana if she has any ideas that she'd like to share on this question of linking meditation to everyday life, maybe that takeoff and landing, or any other way you might want to approach it?
One of the things that I work with in my personal practice is living meditation, or living enlightenment, that having some understanding during meditation, it's how do I live that in my daily life, and how do I make it part of who I am in interaction with other people. So what we talk about is there's seated meditation and there's active meditation, and that during active meditation, our whole life is a meditation, and seeing life as a meditation, and creating those, for me, rituals, or those, they're sitting in the morning, but it also is, for me, including things that encourage me to remember throughout the day to live meditation and come back to my breath. And so I talk about living meditation in a daily life as well as seated meditation. So both of those are really important, because I think what you said, Kirk, is how do we bring heaven on earth, is how do we bring our meditation. And the other part of that is, for me, Suzuki Roshi would say, your mind is supposed to secrete thoughts. And so you open the doors at the windows, the thought comes in, the thought leaves. And if you get caught, you come back to your breath. And I think that's part of our daily life too. What we do is, in our daily life, we will go off on a tangent, and how do we bring ourselves back to our breath and into our meditative practice into our daily life.
And do you, Diana, have specific things that you use to remember during the rest of your day when you aren't in your sitting meditation?
Well, I do an opening to the day and I do a closing to the day. You know, we have a bell and we do a short meditation. I do my meditation in the morning, and then we do my husband and I do meditation opening together. We do a short sitting and then 3 bells. And then we bow to each other. And then we also do that at the end. And also during the day, I mean, little things like being grateful for your food, saying a prayer before you eat, or before when I answer the phone, of taking a breath, or even especially when I have a client, of just asking for inner wisdom to guide me. And so I try to create things during the day that will concretely allow me to remember to live my meditation as my daily practice. Those are just a few things that I use.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
Do other people who are listening in have other suggestions? How do we remember to bring our meditation into our day? Even a little bit.
I could certainly chime in on this one.
Please.
So I actually teach a lot more meditation than I actually do meditation. But I've cultivated quite a few techniques. And one thing for most of us in the modern world is that life is so complex. Our mind is very, very busy with the myriad of hats that we wear, and email accounts that we have, and all of the things that to simply stop that level of activity and settle into something like just the sound of the breath, or the feeling of the breath coming across the whiskers, or the various techniques, is to actually incorporate many of them and to layer these techniques, you know, perhaps starting with just the sound of the breath itself and that gentle sensation of controlling the breath at the back of the throat, and then feeling the air as it passes across the nostrils, and then developing out into more and more layers. So the primary focus is just on the breath, but you're layering it with many, 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 many layers of awareness of the breath, so that you bring the mind to that level of activity. So it's looking at many, many things, but just at that one thing. And I think it helps to converge and bring us down to that single point. And at some point, it just becomes easy. And I think this is the notion of repetition. The other piece that you asked about, I also use an app called the Insight Meditation app, and you can set it up for maybe 20-minute meditation, and you have a bell ring once a minute, because we know that mind just naturally wanders, and when the bell rings, aha, if I did lose focus and I wasn't concentrating on the breath, just the bell reminds me, come right on back. Just a simple reminder, come back. I'm just here breathing. And I think when the mind does quiet, and again, I haven't studied as much as I practiced over the years. So it's just a very simple quieting of the mind, and then the flood of information that comes from what is otherwise the small voice becomes very, very big voice. And that's where I think what Kirk mentioned about very creative is now you're tapped into just the wisdom of the universe.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to help us with?
I really loved hearing all the insights here. I think for myself, the breath is one of the biggest tools, that it's with me at every moment. And so it's really something right there that for an entire drive, sometimes I'll use that time as this entire drive as an exercise to be with the breath and see how one-pointed I can be with the breath. And I find that it really does transform my day when I do take that time. There's a different stillness that takes on. Thank you, Kirk. It was a really wonderful talk.
Glad you enjoyed it.
Eriko, did you have a suggestion for us?
Well, I also still having trouble, like problem, like I cannot like focus to meditate. But this year, I realized more and more that just that in general, we have so much stuff going on and so much stuff to do. So I think when we slow down and eliminating the stuff we need to do, I think like my mind is getting more focused and then calm down, then you can more pay attention to breath and then also inside, and then pay attention to just sitting calmly, and then you can hear the bird chirping or wind sound, or just more pay attention to nature. But I think when you're busy, like so much going on, so much in your mind, you cannot like really see that or hear that. So that's I kind of try to do. Like I don't want to make my life too busy because I get distracted. So I just try to eliminate and then more focus. And then it's getting better, but I'm still like working on progress.
Beautiful.
We all support you in that effort.
Mary, did you want to mention something?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to thank Kirk and all of the contributors throughout this series of meditation, talks. And thank you, Renee, for introducing me to this wonderful group of people. Not to be irreverent, but I was thinking that sometimes my moments of meditation are actually in the shower when nobody else is around. I don't have anybody to bother me, and just the water coming down. And I'm so grateful that we have pure water, that we have, this is the stuff of life. And I really do appreciate, Kirk, all the little things that you have given us. I love I forget which part of it. It was, we have to have the will and the desire. And that's so true for everything in our lives. So I'm so thankful for all of these opportunities, and thank you. Amen.
We're very glad to have you being a regular attender, Mary. We enjoy your comments as well.
Maurice, what do you have to share with us?
Yeah, I was just up in the Sierra Mountains in California, about 7,500 feet in the mountains, and at a very nice cabin, and pristine nature of the light and the snow dust on the trees. And sometimes it just gets you out of a different reality, and I could just sit, and while everyone else took walks and all that kind of thing, I was just sitting in the cabin meditating on it. And I found myself getting into a much more calm mind and even more expansive mind. Yes, things would move away, and then I'd kind of come back and focus again. But it was really a wonderful beauty. So that's my immediate reaction.
Perfect. I just noticed that our time, and so Robert, I wonder whether I could ask you maybe to give a vote of thanks to Kirk for this lovely session we've had this afternoon, this evening.
Yes, I could. I think that we've all calmed down, Kirk. And also inspired to try and keep on trying, because it is difficult, as everyone here seems to really captured a sense of appreciation for what you've outlined, because everyone here must, to some degree, be involved in the practice of meditation or some level of it. So, it was really a wonderful response that you got from the audience. I thought that what you were articulating found a deep resonance with us all. independent of the particulars. And I do think that it's really nice to remember the distinction you made between discursive and non-discursive thinking. That if we're going to merge heaven and earth, so to speak, or universal consciousness, transcendent consciousness with everyday consciousness, that we have to also learn to use the discursive mind. But anyway, thank you, Kirk.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, many mahalos from all of us, Kirk. I want to wish everybody a wonderful takeoff to whatever place of calm and or concentration, focused meditation. Let it be for the sake of all, and let it be so rich and beautiful that you are easily able to touch back down and bring it into your everyday life. Thank you so much, Kirk, and everyone else.
Thanks, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.